This is Jake Pazicki with an ACT Science conflicting viewpoints question. So this question is one of the hardest types of questions that you'll see on a conflicting viewpoints passage, where they're really asking you, they're providing new forms of some new evidence, and they're asking whose argument, scientist one or scientist two's argument, it would most weaken, or sometimes the question will be strengthened, etc. But really, to answer this question correctly, you really have to have a great grasp of both perspectives and viewpoints of both scientists. So I really recommend, if you have the time, reading through the passage again, skimming through it again, to really get a good sense of what's going on. Because the answer choices don't give you any keywords to work from. They just tell you scientist one's argument, scientist two's argument, or both or neither. So you really have to understand what's going on in each of these arguments to answer this question correctly. In this case, the keywords that we're going to work from come from the question itself. So suppose evidence was found that eukaryotic organisms evolved. So let's go. Eukaryotic organisms evolved from archaebacteria, living in symbiosis with eubacteria. This evidence would most weaken blank. Scientist one, scientist two, both, neither of their arguments. So the first thing I would do is I would look for where it talks about archaebacteria or eukaryotic organisms or eubacteria. And reading through here, I find that it talks about it here: eukaryotes, prokaryotes, eubacteria, archaebacteria. And so I would read this whole passage again. And in reading it, I see that basically what the scientist two is saying is that previously we had divided up living cells into prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but that really this group prokaryotes should be made up of archaebacteria and eubacteria. So these three things, eukaryotes, archaebacteria, and eubacteria, all evolved from different original single cell organisms, or these progenotes, as they are defined up here, these universal common ancestors. So that's the argument of scientist two. And if we added the evidence into it, so suppose the evidence was found that eukaryotic organisms evolved from archaebacteria. So saying instead of eukaryotes being their own group, these actually evolved from archaebacteria that lived in symbiosis with eubacteria, so that these things came before eukaryotes. This evidence would most weaken scientist one's argument, scientist two's argument, blank. Okay, so we can see here the scientist two's argument is that these three things, these eubacteria, archaebacteria, and eukaryotes, are the three original organisms, the single cellular organisms from which everything else evolved. Is sort of the foundation of their argument that organisms did not evolve from one single ancestor, instead that several ancestors may have existed. But what this discovery, if this was found, that eukaryotic organisms evolved from archaebacteria, meaning that one of these groups that they thought were completely independent actually was shown to evolve from a more ancient ancestor, that would actually weaken scientist two's argument, because it would give more leeway to scientist one's argument that the single cell creatures evolved from a single common ancestor, right? So a common single cell ancestor, because it's possible that this archaebacteria then could be that ancestor that eukaryotes and even eubacteria could have evolved from. So if you really have to understand that scientist one's saying that all things came from a single cell ancestor, and that scientist two is saying that all things came from these three ancestors, and that this discovery would show that one of these ancestors that was thought to be completely separate actually evolved from a more ancient ancestor, which is more in line with this everything came from one ancestor theory that scientist one has. So it actually it doesn't weaken scientist one's argument. It does weaken scientist two's argument. It doesn't weaken both, and it doesn't weaken neither because it does weaken scientist two. So the answer choice has to be B, scientist two's argument.